Let's start with a question. When you look around at the room you're in, the objects around you, the ground beneath your feet, what do you see? A solid physical world, right? A world that seems fixed and tangible, made of matter. Now, let me ask you this. How do you know that this world exists? You see it, hear it, touch it, but where do all these sensations arise? Have you ever stopped to consider that everything you experience, every sight, every sound, every texture is happening within awareness? This idea that the material world is not as independent or solid as it seems has been at the heart of profound philosophical and spiritual inquiry for centuries. It challenges one of our deepest assumptions, that matter is primary and consciousness arises from it. What if the opposite is true? What if the world we call material is in fact mental? What if matter itself arises within mind, not the other way around? This perspective, known as idealism, is radical but not new. It's been explored by great thinkers across time, and it asks us to look more closely at what we take for granted. Let's start with an insight from the philosopher George Berkeley, who famously argued, "To be is to be perceived." What he meant was that we never encounter matter directly. When we see a tree, for instance, we don't experience the tree out there. What we experience are sensations, color, texture, shape, all of which arise in our awareness. Without perception, there is no tree as we know it. For Berkeley, the idea of a material world existing independently of consciousness didn't make sense. He saw reality as fundamentally mental, sustained by the infinite awareness that some might call God. But this isn't just an abstract philosophical argument. Let's bring it closer to home. Imagine a dream. While you're dreaming, the world of the dream feels real. You see landscapes, interact with people, feel emotions. Yet when you wake up, you realize that every aspect of the dream, its sights, sounds, and characters, was created by your mind. Now consider this. Could waking life work in a similar way? Could the physical world we experience be more like a shared dream arising within a universal consciousness? This idea isn't limited to philosophy. Many spiritual traditions have been pointing to it for centuries. In Advaita Vedanta, a non-dual tradition of Hinduism, the material world is seen as Maya, an appearance within the infinite field of awareness known as Brahman. The world isn't unreal, but it's not independent either. It's like a wave on the surface of the ocean, real as a wave, but inseparable from the water beneath it. Buddhism offers a similar insight. Some teachings describe the world as mind only, not because it's imaginary, but because what we perceive as external reality arises within consciousness. When you look at a tree, the tree you experience is not separate from the awareness that perceives it. This doesn't mean the tree isn't there. It means the tree, as you know it, exists as part of a co-emergent process between observer and the world. Now, let's look at what modern psychology and science have to say about this. Neuroscience has shown us that everything we experience is filtered and constructed by the brain. Light waves hit the retina, sound waves vibrate the eardrum, but these raw signals don't become a world until the brain organizes them into a coherent experience. What we call the external world is always mediated by perception. In other words, what we see as out there is already shaped by the mind. Even quantum physics hints at this. Experiments show that particles behave differently depending on whether they're observed. It's as if the act of observation plays a role in shaping reality itself. While physics doesn't necessarily prove idealism, it certainly opens the door to questioning whether matter is as fixed and objective as we think. So what does this mean for how we live? If the world isn't made of matter but arises within consciousness, then our relationship to it changes. The idea of being a small, isolated self navigating a vast, indifferent universe begins to dissolve. Instead, we start to see ourselves as part of the same awareness that gives rise to everything. The boundaries between self and world, inner and outer, begin to blur. The world isn't something separate from us, it's an extension of the same infinite field of consciousness. This shift isn't just intellectual, it's deeply practical. When we stop seeing the world as something out there, we stop feeling so separate from it. Imagine walking through a forest and not seeing the trees as objects, but as expressions of the same awareness that you are. Imagine looking at another person and realizing that the boundary you've always felt between me and them is, at its core, a mental construct. This realization fosters connection, compassion, and a sense of belonging to something far greater than the individual self. Now, some might ask, if the world is mental, does that mean it's not real? Not at all. The world is real, but its reality is not independent. It's like the ocean and its waves. The waves are real as waves, but they're never separate from the water. Similarly, the material world is real as an appearance, but it's inseparable from the awareness in which it arises. This perspective also frees us from a great deal of fear and striving. If matter is not primary, if consciousness is the ground of being, then the loss of physical form, what we call death, doesn't touch the essence of what we are. Just as waves rise and fall while the ocean remains, the forms of life come and go within the unchanging field of awareness. Knowing this can bring a profound sense of peace. So how do we explore this for ourselves? Start by questioning the assumption that what you see, hear, and touch exists independently of your experience of it. Notice how everything you encounter, the sights, the sounds, even the feeling of your own body, arises within your awareness. Ask yourself, where does the world end and awareness begin? The more you look, the more you'll see that the boundary is not as clear as it seems. This isn't about adopting a belief, it's about direct experience. You don't have to take anyone's word for it, not mine, not Berkeley's, not the mystics. You can look for yourself. And as you do, you might begin to see that the world you thought was made of matter is, in fact, made of mind. That the physical and the mental are not two. That what you are and what the world is have always been one. This understanding doesn't separate us from life, it draws us closer. It's an invitation to live with wonder, to see the world not as a collection of objects, but as a living expression of awareness itself. And in that seeing, the boundary between inner and outer, self and other, begins to dissolve, revealing the infinite unity that has always been here, waiting to be noticed.